My name is Jim Burke, and I have the good fortune of being the CEO of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And I wanted to welcome you here and say thank you for being here. I have a lot of a connectivity to this organization and this evening, obviously as the leader of this extraordinary institution. I also happen to have my roots in education. Was actually a while ago, I was the principal at Hamilton High School, right in the area. I formed the Academy of Music that was there, and it came full circle and around, and have circled back to UCLA where I studied, and now I'm the chair of the executive board for the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. So my connection with the school runs very deep, and my concern for the school runs very deep. And the fact that you're here today, both students, faculty, and other and people who are from the community who are so interested and involved in a school that is so extraordinarily important to us and the lifeblood of the city, is really very impressive. It's important. This conversation tonight is very important. It aligns with the mission of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which we focus on fighting anti-Semitism anywhere and everywhere, on defending the state of Israel, and using the lessons of the Holocaust to teach empathy and tolerance. And I think that underscores the conversation tonight, and the fact that you're here for this conversation to talk about how do we operate in a different environment than we're currently operating is extraordinarily important, because we see what's going on at UCLA going on across the country. And we're embedded in those conversations, and we're frustrated, and we're scared, and we're anxious, not only for the students who go there, but on a larger level for the lack of a civilized discourse and a unified treatment of people, and acceptance of that in either fair retribution or political correctness and so forth. And we know there's a better way. We know we push through this, but we only do it through conversations like tonight. And so I think that's what makes this organization so important, and the work that they're doing, because they're not here to be divisive. This organization is focused on wanting to actually make a difference and actually commit people to a more positive change. So I think with that we should jump into the evening. But I do want to say that Dr. Keir Stein, the founder and chair for the Jewish Faculty Resilience Group, which I did not know the name JFrg in its original intention, which I thought was out of the biology department at first, but the idea of coming together for this, for people actually interested in this type of conversation, is really extraordinary. And I think it's important, and I want you to know, and the organization to know, this house is your house. Whenever you want to have conversations like this, conversations meant to forward, intellectual thought, to have conversations, to take on difficult topics. That's why the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles exists. So anytime you want to be here, you have that. So let's jump in with the evening, and I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, senior editor of the Free Press. Please join me in welcoming Peter Savodnik. Peter. Over to you.
And I'd like to welcome our panelists, if everyone wants to come up. Good evening. I am Peter Savodnik, senior editor at the Free Press. It is an honor to be with you. Before we get to our esteemed panel, I'm going to try to map out how we arrived at this juncture. So if you'll forgive me, I'd like to speak for just a few minutes longer than I normally would. We find ourselves in a dangerous and deeply troubling moment that most, if not all, American Jews thought was permanently behind us. Last week, the New Jersey Senate canceled a hearing on anti-Semitism because Senate leaders could not guarantee that Jews would be safe in the State House. The week before, protesters in Oakland shouted, quote, disgusting Jew pigs, close quote, and threw glass bottles with fake blood at attendees of a private talk also on anti-Semitism. There are the Jewish MIT students suing the university on the grounds that the university has fomented an anti-Semitic environment, and the Jewish employees of TikTok and Google and Starbucks who have complained of a rabid anti-Semitism on internal message boards and or in their workers' unions. There is the ADL report that found that there has been a 361% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the 3-month period following October 7th. And of course, there was the pro-Hamas encampment at UCLA, which was not that dissimilar to encampments on any number of campuses across the United States, where students' ignorance of Judaism and Zionism and Israel and America and American history is rivaled only by the certainty of their convictions. To them, the Israelis, and by extension, Jews across the diaspora, and presumably most people in this room tonight, are guilty of genocide. Never mind that the Palestinian population has grown over the past several decades, or that there are no death camps, or that this amounts to a horrific form of projection. To them, there is literally no one on earth who is more evil than Zionists. It is not correct to say that this is 1930s Germany. No one is wearing armbands. No one is being hauled away in the middle of the night. Jew hate has not become state policy. But it is correct to say that for the first time in more than a half century, American Jews have been plunged back into a world in which a low-level anti-Semitism pervades nearly all of our major institutions, a world in which unspoken quotas and gentleman agreements are the norm. The halcyon moment that I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, in which anti-Semitism was truly the sociology of losers, a mark of one's backwardness and unimportance, is over. Nor should anyone think that this is an exclusively Jewish problem. Everyone knows, or at least everyone should know, that moments of anti-Semitism are always accompanied by decline and mass fragmentation. This has been the case for 2,000 years. Anti-Semitism, in other words, is a leading indicator of a much bigger default or upheaval, And that upheaval will not discriminate between Jews and non-Jews, but between those who believe in liberalism and pluralism and individualism and those who do not. How did we get here? Once upon a time, anti-Semitism, as everyone knows, mostly came from the right, and it was vicious and violent and, yes, genocidal. Today's anti-Semitism overwhelmingly comes from the left. This confuses a great many old-fashioned liberals who say things like, but we marched with Black Lives Matter, we posted our hate has no home here yard signs, we display our pronouns at the bottom of our email signatures. All of that is beside the point. No one cares. Once again, today's anti-Semitism overwhelmingly comes from the left. And it suggests, and sometimes it openly asserts, that Jews are uber white, that they are the financiers and chief beneficiaries of a system of structural racism, and that they are paying for the settler colonialists in the Jewish state in Israel and Israeli subjugation of people of color in the West Bank and Gaza. They view Gaza as the front line in a global struggle against white supremacy. Tonight, I am very, very pleased to moderate our panel hosted by the Jewish Faculty Resilience Group at UCLA, some of the only faculty at UCLA, or for that matter, anywhere in the country, courageous enough to confront and to try to do something about this hate. Our panel includes Nir Hoffman, a professor of anesthesiology at UCLA at the David Geffen School of Medicine, and the leader of a recent faculty trip to Israel. To Nir's left, David Nimmer, a law school professor and the former president of the Modern Orthodox Congregation B'nai David Judea. And next to David, Vivian Burt, a professor emeritus of psychiatry at the medical school who has been affiliated with the university for 40 years and is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. And last but definitely not least, Judea Pearl, a celebrated computer scientist and philosopher, and the father of the late Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl. The question for our panelists this evening is, what exactly do we do? How do we fight anti-Semitism on campus? My hope is that by the time you leave this evening, by the time we wrap up, you will have 3 or 4 concrete ideas that you can mull over, argue about, maybe lobby for. But before we jump into all that, I want our panelists to paint a picture of what has happened over the past several months. How has life changed on campus since the academic year began? So without further ado, I would like to start with you here. And just, again, you can just describe sort of what has happened since, what was supposed to be a fairly ordinary academic year, the 2023-2024 school year began.
A lot has happened. But for me personally, the biggest change was that I went from being a physician, a professor of anesthesiology, a researcher, somebody who was leading a startup company, who was respected amongst my peers and the medical students and the campus at large. And suddenly I became the Zionist, the Jew, the guy that is mocked and humiliated on student social media, the professor who gets assaulted, tackled during an interview at the Quad. And I finally understood the question that I couldn't understand until now, which is, how did this happen in the 1930s? How did this transpire? And I think I understand it now, because having been in the university for now, more than 20 years, I just couldn't imagine that those around me, especially below me in rank, would be willing to turn on me and basically wish for nothing more than my eviction and destruction in that campus. And I think the lack of believing that that is possible is our greatest weakness. That's what happened to the Jews in Germany, 0.8%, but 25% of the Nobel Prize winners. They were at the top of the pyramid everywhere, and one day they were gone.
We speak with a variety of voices. I'm surrounded by 2 doctors, and what has happened at the medical school is absolutely traumatic. At the law school, where I find myself, there certainly have been changes, but nothing so dramatic. I spoke to one of my students from my seminar who's Jewish, and also the head of the Jewish Law Students Association, to find out how traumatic it has been. And I guess the word that I would use for them is that they're sad, they're rattled. They've certainly confronted anti-Semitism on campus. They've seen posters torn down of the hostages, but it has not permeated their life in the way that we just heard. I have taught my class wearing a kippah with students who are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, etc. In fact, it was even a First Amendment seminar, so by rights it should have been very contentious, but we managed to get through without a cross word being spoken, and I've not had anything directed against me. This is not to say that things in the law school are easy. The students go to the central campus. We know what happened at Roy Squad. We know that this is existing all over. And just to mention one random event, I was speaking to an alum who's a friend of mine, and she organized the Women's Valentine's Day, the Women-in-Law Valentine's Day banquet. That banquet was taken over by Palestinian sympathizers wearing keffiyehs who proceeded to devote the entire evening to polemical speeches about Palestine. Okay, so that's not the greatest tragedy in the world that the Valentine's Day event was taken over, but it's symptomatic. So it's there, it's everywhere, but I don't want to say it is a constant brooding presence in our life at the law school.
Vivian, if you want to.
I want to take a moment to digress. Forgive me. I want to take you back 66 years. 66 years, 1958. I was 14 years old. I was sitting in the kitchen with my mother and waiting for my dad to come home for supper. He came home. He was a salesman in Manhattan, and we were living in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn. And he was in tears, and he was shaking. I asked him, "What happened, Daddy?" And he said that he had gotten a ticket for jaywalking. He said, "Nicht gefährlich, it's okay. These things happen, no big deal." And he said, "You don't understand. When he gave me the ticket, his uniform, I forgot how to speak English. He asked me for my address. I gave him my Berlin address. I didn't even remember I didn't even know I remembered my Berlin address. I know he felt bad, but he had to continue with the ticket because he started it. So we comforted him. We were sitting around the kitchen table. All of a sudden, we got a phone call. The phone call was from the policeman. He said, "Is he okay? I'm so sorry. Once I started writing the ticket, I couldn't stop. I know what he's been through, you know? We know. Is he okay?" That's why I'm telling this story, because there was a human being who made contact with another human being and understood his pain, wanted to know where he came from, and wanted to extend a hand, to extend comfort. So now let me answer your question. What have I seen at UCLA? Well, nothing could be more different. I actually visited the encampment. I spent 2 hours there. My husband and I went there. Couldn't get in. I identified myself. I showed my ID. I'm a Jewish professor. I said, "I'd like to go in. I'd like to talk to whoever's in there. I'd like to find out what you think. One-on-one. I'll talk to you. You can talk to me. This is how we can get a discussion going." Most of those in the kefiyas wouldn't even look at me or talk to me, but there were 3 young men who were the gatekeepers, and I was able to engage with them. 2 of them are pre-med, one of them was an economy student. And they wouldn't tell me what they believed in. I said, "How come?" "Well, there's an expert inside the encampment. He told us we can't talk." "Why? Why can't you talk?" "Why? Because we might misspeak. If you want to know what we stand for, look up the Manifest of Students for Justice in Palestine," they said, and we all know what that is. So that's one thing that happened. As I walked past the encampment after 2 hours of waiting, I saw someone standing in front of the pictures of the hostages, holding high a poster with a swastika and the Jewish star with a cross on it. That's what I saw. I attended a lecture in my department. I attended a lecture called Depathologizing Resistance. And in that lecture, they talked about somebody who killed himself by burning himself for the cause because he said there was genocide. The Jews committed genocide. And in that same lecture, there was justification for October 7th, supposedly because of 75 years of colonization. And at that lecture, there was someone in the leadership of UCLA on the faculty who was there too. She saw the whole thing. No one stopped it. I can give many, many other examples, but let me stop there.
Thank you, Vivian.
I had a totally different experience. I've been in UCLA for about 55 years, and I'm shielded because I'm fortunate enough to be in the sciences, in the School of Engineering, in computer science department, and I have not personally experienced any of the stories that you have been talking about. Plus, I've been involved with this issue of anti-Semitism for the past 2.5 decades. So I've seen how this campus turned around to what it is today. I've seen it coming because I've seen professors, all departments digging deep Hamas tunnels under our campus. And what we are seeing now is those tunnels emerging and constituting a real threat, the kind that you have been talking about. But I have seen this coming, and I tried my best to alarm both the community, the faculty, and the administration that this ought to be taken care of. But there wasn't any echoing, there wasn't any attention paid to that. So I could elaborate later on what I mean by those tunnels, and we'll discuss it from there. But let me just add that it has started a long time ago, and the Jewish community is partly responsible for letting it take its course and not putting a stop to it when we still could.
Thank you, everyone. With all this in mind, with all the changes that have swept the campus in mind, I want to hear from each of you one big idea that you have for combating anti-Semitism very succinctly. We'll come back to sort of getting into the details later, but 30 seconds or less, what's one thing that UCLA could do right now to make life better? Let's start with you, Nir.
I think the most important thing we need to do is have an organized PR campaign against BDS. BDS is basically the oxygen that is fueling the fire. If the fire is the Jew hatred, the students are the fuel, and the BDS propaganda is basically the oxygen. And that fire is going to burn outside of the campus. So what we need is an organized campaign to delegitimize the concept of BDS.
David.
I'm going to return to the first American value, namely the First Amendment. I not only teach the subject, but I'm passionately committed to it. Jews thrive in an environment of free conscience, which requires freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is often painful. We can hear very disturbing and hateful speech, but it's necessary for us as Jews to uphold that fundamental value of freedom of speech.
Vivian.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit for a moment about DEI, which is, if you don't know what those initials stand for, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. A huge program at pretty much every university across the country, including UCLA. And who isn't in favor of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I am. Probably most of you are as well. The problem is that this behemoth organization at UCLA has gone from a diverse, inclusive organization to something that has excluded people. And so, sadly, because of that, I really think we need to end DEI.
Thank you. Judea.
My recommendation would be for us and for the administration to fight anti-Zionism. I coined a name for that. It's called Zionophobia. We are currently being attacked as Zionists, not as Jews, and we should fight back as Zionists, not as Jews.
Great, thank you very much. David, I want to go back to your proposal for a second. You said that the university to help make life, to help transcend its anti-Semitism, should make room for maximal free speech. It should permit people to speak freely, to express themselves freely. Am I not correct in thinking that the encampment is simply free speech, and that at the same time, everyone up here tonight is very upset about the encampment? How do you reconcile those two?
Part of the encampment, indeed, was dedicated to freedom of speech, and that part should have been allowed to survive. Unfortunately, it was married to something very different, which was being an encampment. There are rules at UCLA against sleeping overnight on the quad for very good reasons. Those rules were flouted by a group that came in, set up barricades, and in fact, they took over all the barricades at UCLA, made themselves into a compound, at which point they started excluding Zionists, read Jews, from entering their midst. So it's absolutely extraordinary to see that in a campus, you could be excluded as a professor or as a student from walking on the main quad or for entering the library because you don't have an armband that's given to you by these student protesters. So we have to distinguish between, on the one hand, their free speech, and on the other hand, they're breaking the law. In 1967, the University of Chicago adopted a proposal proposed by a law professor named Harry Calvin. And the Calvin report has been the operative rule at the University of Chicago since, and it contained a remarkable proposition, namely, the university is dedicated to free inquiry. It's not there as a social justice warrior. It's not there to inculcate. It's there to hear all points of view. And to this day, the University of Chicago has been relatively immune from the mania that we have seen sweeping the country. And so UCLA could have taken a good lesson from the Calvin report.
David, just one more follow-up question, and then we'll move on. The one, I guess, question or problem that I imagine comes up when universities consider now embracing freedom of speech is people like me, journalists, are going to say to the universities, well, where have you been for the past 4 or 5 decades as freedom of speech has been steadily eroded? And why is it that when it comes to Jew hate or anti-Semitism, you're suddenly embracing freedom of expression? We saw what happened, right, on those congressional hearings when the presidents of now Harvard and Penn have both lost their jobs. When asked, it's a sort of dumb question, right? Does calling for the genocide of Jews, is that protected speech? Well, the right answer, according to you, should be yes. But the problem with answering that is that you then walk into the trap of, but where have you been? Why is that protected? But somebody commenting on someone's hair in class is a microaggression that could land you in all kinds of hot water.
No, you're exactly right. If we evaluate the president's testimony to Congress from the metric of the First Amendment, they did a stellar job because they were trained by counsel, they were overtrained by counsel to just give rote answers depending on the First Amendment without taking cognizance of the fact that their universities have not been recognizing free speech for decades, as you say. So we have to pair freedom of speech with a whole environment that then leads into eliminating DEI as a malign force that bites people's head off when they say the wrong thing. So it's all of a piece.
So, okay, speaking of DEI, Vivian, DEI, you want to end it. Explain, if you will, what could possibly be wrong with wanting to diversify or make a campus more equitable or more inclusive, and how are any of those things connected to anti-Semitism? It doesn't make any sense on the face of it.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, does it, until you look below the surface, because what DEI does is it has as its basic premise a binary, that the world, in fact, is divided into oppressors and oppressed. And people of color are considered the oppressed, and white people are considered the oppressors. So let's go a little bit further and dig a little deeper. What about the Jews? Well, think about it. Jews make up 2% of Americans, 0.2% of the world. And they are considered to be overrepresented in terms of what we think of as success. They're artists, they're scientists, they've devised wonderful medicines and medical devices, they're academicians, they're writers, so on and so forth. They've been prominent in the motion picture industry in the past. So when you look at all of that, what they would say, rather than this is due to talent or hard work, that this is undeserved enrichment. And it is very, very hard when that is the binary, because then that means that Jews are even more so than just your average white person. And by the way, there are many Jews who would not consider themselves white and aren't, and take a look at Israel, because the majority of Israeli Jews are people of color in fact. So that becomes a problem. And then let's go even a little bit deeper, because we want to talk about Zionism, because most Jews really believe in the state of Israel. That is part of how they see themselves as Jews. And so, given that, if you're a Zionist, you're even more on the fringe, and you're even more guilty of having achieved success. And so this is what, unfortunately, has happened with regard to DEI, because I can tell you, when I went to a faculty executive committee meeting and talked about this, I was mocked and scorned, even when I tried to explain that I just want to have a dialogue. My own students, in fact, mocked and scorned. People I didn't even know felt this way about me, mocked and scorned me. I felt totally marginalized and isolated. This is what DEI stands for. Now, one last thing. You might say, well, okay, if DEI separates people into oppressors and oppressed, we all know Jews have a long history of being oppressed, right? Maybe we should go hat in hand to the DEI faculty and say, let us into the oppressed group, right? Well, I would argue that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be dividing people up by oppressed or oppressors. I don't want to be part of that group. I want to be seen as a human being. That's why I told the story about the policeman. I want everybody to be seen as a human being. After all, you know, what did Eleanor Roosevelt say? And I wrote this down so I don't want to forget it. She said, it is better for everyone if it is better for everyone. That's where I think we should be in our universities, in the world.
Vivian, thank you. So Nir, explain, because the connection's not obviously clear to me, how is any of this connected to BDS, which, by the way, okay, so for the uninitiated, boycott, divestment, sanctions is an effort to punish Israeli companies for the perceived wrongdoing of their government. How is addressing that going to make life in any way better concretely for Jewish students, Jewish faculty? How is it going to contribute to the mission of the university?
So the BDS movement wants you to think that this is South Africa 2.0, that what they're doing is they are lobbying against a foreign government to try to change that foreign government's policy. But that's not what the BDS movement is doing at all. In fact, it should be renamed the DBE movement. First, they delegitimize, then they boycott, and then they evict. So let me explain that. So the delegitimization is basically calling Zionists as the worst, most vile form of human life on this planet. They do this in their lectures that they have, in these encampments, these marches, these protests. They're very vocal, they're all over the campus, and they're basically telling everybody that Zionism and Zionists are just pure evil. Now, they're not talking about Pat Robertson and the evangelical Christians. Let's face it, the Zionists that they're referring to are pretty much the Jews. So that's the delegitimization, and that's very similar to what happened in the 1930s in Germany, where the Jews were targeted as being swine, pigs, vermin, cockroaches, whatever it is that the Nazis introduced. Then comes the boycott. We know what the Nazis did to boycott, but look at who is being boycotted on campus. It's not the Israel Military Industries. It's not Raphael. The Students for Justice for Palestine and their faculty supporters are calling for the boycott of Hillel. Okay? The undergraduate student council is calling for the boycott of the Nazarian Israel Study Center. So that's who they're boycotting. They're boycotting the Zionist/Jewish institutions at the UCLA campus. Now, once you call, and by the way, then the unions, like the United Auto Workers, they call for an illegal strike, not because they have any issues with any labor issues, salaries, etc. They're just not happy about BDS, about Israel, about Gaza, about Palestine. So they just want to have a strike and shut down the functional part of the campus, all the education and the research. And what they ultimately want to do is make the campus so inhospitable for Jews that they just leave. Basically, they want to evict us, just like the Nazis planned in the 1930s with the Nuremberg laws.
So, yes, yes, Julia, that leads me to a question that I want to ask you, which is...
I want to talk about the
you want to
BDS.
address, okay, but
just to,
but it would be good. I would like to get deeper into your idea of Zionophobia, which, if just for a moment, the question I have is, and it seems like a reasonable question, right? Why can't Jews just be anti-Israel? Why can't they just reject Zionism? Why can't they embrace Zionophobia and at the same time be Jews? There have been Jews living in the diaspora forever, or at least for 2,000 years. Why not just abandon?
why not what? I didn't get the question.
Why is Zionophobia, why is hatred of Israel necessarily a problem? Why can't a Jew be a Jew in the absence, without Israel?
Because we Jews are connected, are glued together by common memories. That is what currently holds us together. Common experience. Okay? We lost the glue of religiosity. We lost the glue of language. We talk different language than people in Israel. Yeah? But what remains is common experience and common memories. Okay? Now, Israel is a culmination of Jewish history. Our history is our glues. And history in Israel is a culmination of Jewish history. When you take away Israel, you take away the core of our identity. Okay? That is one reason why why the largest majority of Jews are indeed Zionists, although many of us hesitate to call ourselves Zionists because our enemies has succeeded in contaminating and making this name Zionism a symbol of evil. We shouldn't agree to that. We shouldn't give up. Zionism This is what holds us together, and we should answer these questions directly as Zionists. Have I answered the question?
But now you okay? Yes, you did. That was. We're getting. I'm seeing lots of questions coming in, which is fantastic. Thank you, and please keep sending them. I want to go back though to David in response to what Nir is saying and what Judea is saying. How does more speech on campus address those questions? How does that? I'm still kind of grappling or wrestling with this idea of, more freedom of speech is going to lead to less hatred of Jews. How is it that, and again, I mean, if we're allowing people to say anything, to express the most vile opinions, how is it that is going to be fruitful in the long term?
So let me ask Nir and Vivian. You've both talked about being shut down, but people saying, well, there goes the Zionist, refusing to interact with you about DEI. To me, that comes from a culture of closure, of refusing to speak, of calling certain issues out of line. We know the answer already. You're not even allowed to discuss it. So tell me if I'm right in what I'm hearing of what you're saying. And if I am right, then an openness, which is the symbol of free speech, will start to redress it.
Well, I'll give you one example of why I think speech is not necessarily going to bridge this gap. So in the Sunday morning counter-protest that many of you may have been to for the encampment, there was a moment where the Palestinian protesters had basically encroached on the quad that we had a legal permit for, and were basically trying to kick us out of our own protest. And I basically was actually cooperating with somebody from the other side, and we were trying to create essentially like a human wall to try to prevent people from starting to fight. And at one point, he stuck his arm out, and I stuck my arm out, and I locked hands with him, almost like in a handshake. And this guy looked at me like I literally, I don't know, what's the worst thing you could do to somebody? Urinate on him? I mean, it was like the most disgusting look, and all I could think of was like, I'm gonna have a conversation with this person about what? I mean, he doesn't even want to touch my hand in a handshake. That's vile. But that's how they see Zionists, as just people you need to eliminate, eject, defeat, exterminate, kill, not talk with.
So Judea, maybe you can explain this. How is it that Zionism or Zionists have become this object of hate in a way that is utterly mystifying to me? I mean, there are a lot of people to, hate in the world or to heap scorn at. The Chinese have more than 1.8 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. The Saudis have been pummeling the Yemenis. The Syrians have been doing awful things to Palestinians, and on and on and on. How is it that Zionism has become almost this like talisman-like force? It's like the swastika used to be, right? What has happened that Zionism has acquired this almost magical, pernicious aura?
Part of it is what Vivian described as a result of this EDI, or let's say oppressor-oppressed framework with which these people operate. So it's part of the general progressive, over-progressive, I should say, movement that has controlled or dominated our education. But the question still remains, why Zionism, why Israel? I think part of it is because progressives, our faculty will never forgive Israel for defying the textbooks on which they were educated. The textbook says that nationalism is bad, and nationalism always leads to evil regime or some sort of totalitarian. And here is Israel proving them wrong. It's a successful society that lifted itself from the margin of history into a world center of progress in entrepreneurship, in science, in art, and so on, and becomes part of the modern world, center, contributing center. So it defies the basic idea that nationalism is bad. Okay? We'll never forgive Israel for that. So that's, I think, one reason that we are seeing that phenomena. Plus, okay, I'll stop here at this point.
Yeah, I would add to that. It's, in a way, it's an extension of what I was saying, which is the oppressor versus the oppressor. Once you become super successful, and look what Israel has done. I mean, it's unbelievable. They've blossomed in so many ways. That becomes suspect. How can that be? And you know, the saddest part to me, there are two things that really are the most disappointing. Number one is our faculty at UCLA that are silent, that let this happen, and they don't, it's not a word of support. It's just so discouraging and so disappointing. You know, that's the one large part of the problem. And the other part of the problem of, I hate to say it, is our own people, the silent Jewish people, who, I get it, you want to go on, you have your homes, you want to go on, and those who are students, they just really want to pass their tests and they want to go ahead, they want to be promoted, they want to get on to their careers. It's just easier to be quiet, which is why JFrg, you know, we're 200 strong, but we need to be stronger because there's no one, if we don't speak up as a group, as a family, which is what we are, nobody else is going to speak up for us.
So, before we continue with this conversation, I'd like to turn to some questions. We're getting lots from the audience. So let me ask, and I'd like all of you to address them succinctly because there's a lot there, but I think they all deserve, I would like to hear from all of you because I think there's some really good questions. The first of which is that we tend to fight anti-Semitism with logic, but these people, presumably that means people who are anti-Semitic, don't use the language of reason. Must we turn to threatening to withhold donations and enrollment? Should we just leave these spaces of DEI? Vivian, why don't we start with you, since...
What did you say about, I didn't hear what you said. Should we just
leave these spaces? So look, there is a whole movement afoot right now in the kind of parallel education space, right? There is the University of Austin. There are new independent, kind of educational projects. Universities are being, seeded or popping up. There are large state schools in red states that are benefiting enormously from what's happening on campus here. I just spoke with a dean at the University of Oklahoma who was telling me about how she's getting, calls from faculty, up and down the East Coast. Maybe the best option is not to try to do anything about UCLA, but to leave UCLA.
Yeah, and there are people who believe that, and that's, you're right. We have, Touro and other universities, right, which really are, we think, safe havens for Jews. Or we can all move to Israel, and there's a lot to be said for that too. That's okay. But for those of us who are here, who believe we need to, because you see, if we don't fight it here, don't put your heads in the sand. We can all flee to Israel, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but you can say that. But what about those that are in the diaspora, that stay here? Shouldn't we do something about about this terrible thing that's happening that I see at UCLA. You just can't sit still and let it happen. And even though the idea of DEI is good, honestly, it's based on this faulty premise. And I personally, I'm too old right now to go elsewhere. But I'm not too old to fight what's going on here.
So Nir, quickly, why shouldn't Jews just leave in legacy institutions? Why should they stay at UCLA and not found new institutions or go to the institutions that are being created, these kind of parallel spaces?
Well, I believe wholeheartedly that we can win this fight. We are smarter than they are. We're much more resilient. And the last time I checked, we have the God of the Hebrews behind us. I mean, a fog rolls in, a helicopter crashes. I mean, lots of things are going our way. So we could definitely win this fight, but we have to actually, be smart about what we do. And so I think the PR campaign in social media is important. Short, very palatable films to convince students that are uneducated and don't know anything about this, that to expose them to the fact that these causes that they're supporting are actually very similar to Nazi causes, number one. And number two, at the end of the day, we are a country of laws. So, a referee is not expected to choose one team or another. They're just expected to referee the match correctly. So the Congress, which is the legislative part of our government, can throw in a yellow card or even a red card. And that's, I think, the next step.
David, please.
If the entire story were everything we've been focusing on, then the answer, Peter, would be it's too late, let's abandon UCLA. Happily, this is not the entire story. It was terrible when they had that encampment and hundreds of students were gathered there. But they weren't hundreds of students. There were a lot of outside organizers. So the number of students that were there, I don't know the count, maybe it was 200. Okay, how many students are there at UCLA? There are 29,000. So we have a terribly vocal, a tiny minority, which will not do any good with dialogue. They're going to hate you. They're going to not talk to you. They're going to not want to touch you. But these people, not only do they hate Jews, Israel, and Zion, there's another thing that they hate. They hate America. And so when the encampment was disbanded, we saw the graffiti there, F Israel, F America, et cetera, et cetera. It actually has caused me to understand something that mystified me in 1979. You mentioned Iran. The Ayatollah Khomeini took over and said, the United States is the great Satan, Israel is the little Satan. I heard those words at the time, and I had no idea what he could possibly be talking about. But I see that there's a lot of the world that has aligned to say Israel is the little Satan, America is the great Satan. So if you want to stand up for America, stand up for the Jews, and that's the message we have to give.
Thank you. Judea, so fight or flight?
I'm going to relate to this topic, yeah.
Yeah.
Why UCLA? Because I believe UCLA is redeemable. For the past 3 decades, we have been negligent and we fought the wrong virus. And now when we focus on the right virus, I think we can redeem this campus. And how did we go wrong? Number one, I said we let the intellectual Hamas tunnel be dug under our campus without our attention, without our permission, essentially. And together with these intellectual tunnels, we lost institutional strongholds. We as Jews, or we as Zionists, we lost 3 institutional strongholds. We used to have here the Center of Near East Studies. We used to have that taught. When I say we had, they were taught the Zionist narrative as part of their curriculum. We had history department, Zionist narrative was taught there. We had the Jewish Center, Jewish Studies Center. Zionist narrative was part of their curriculum. Now we have only half, and this is the Nazarian Center. I'll explain to you why I say half, okay? So we lost the institutional strongholds, and that is a mistake. Together with that, I'm talking to reverse this process. We should have community input, and this is something that our enemies are speaking against it. They called, for instance, Stand With Us an outside force. They call even Hillel outside force. It's not part of the insider. Okay. Even the donors, they donated the not Nazarian Center, but I would say the Jewish Standard, yes, the Alan Levy Center, right? Outside force. Wrong. Jewish input, community input is a stakeholder here. So by virtue of us being committed and invested in expectation. The reason, and let me explain to you, that's very important.
Well, actually, Judith, if we could just, I want to get in a few more questions, if we can, and then come back.
This is the most important
part. Okay, the most important part. Yeah. So I don't want to cut off the most important part.
Yes.
No, please.
We as a community, Los Angeles community, we are the parents of the students of tomorrow. And we are the parents of the donors of to the university tomorrow. We are stakeholders. And by the reason that we have a say, we should have a say in what's going on in those departments is because having a Jewish Studies Center implies a certain expectation, implies that a donor comes in tomorrow, he cannot start another center. They told him it already exists, which means when students looking into university, they say, oh, we have a Jewish Studies Center, we have a Nazarian Center, which means it's okay to go there. By virtue of this expectation, we should have a say.
Right. So we have a few questions that are targeted or addressed specifically to panelists. So I want to make these quick, but I would love to hear from all, just one at a time. David, quickly, there were people at the encampment who were screaming, "Kill the Jews." Should that have been allowed in the interest of free speech?
Good. Thank you for the tough
and if
question.
you could, let's do this in a minute or less. Why is kill the Jews? Okay.
I'll try to make it 30 seconds. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay. Hate speech is First Amendment protected speech. Kill the Jews, disgusting, despicable statement. Yes, that's protected speech. On the other hand, hey, there's a Jew over there, get him. Okay, that is not protected speech. You hate it, that's fine. It's despicable. It's fine to despise hateful speech, but we're all better off in a society in which nobody can tell me that my speech is hateful because I'm a Jew.
Vivian, question for you. How do we begin to oppose the DEI indoctrination movement without alienating colleagues and students? So how do you do what you're doing without getting the whole of UCLA to think that you're a Nazi, which is what they already think because you're here tonight?
Which we have been called
Right.
crazy. That's a very good question. I think the way we do it is to gather together those who heretofore have been silent, because as you say, it's the minority that speaks. We're a small group here. Thank goodness we have more people, but the problem is I know that I know colleagues who have told me, I don't want to sign those petitions that you've circulated because I don't want to get involved. I don't want to come down on one side or the other. Maybe I won't get tenure. Maybe But in unity, if we're all together, that won't happen. If we're splintered, if we have the silent majority who I believe don't want this to happen to us, then we can succeed, which is why we're having this meeting, and I hope that we'll have another meeting with twice as many people and more supporters.
Thank you. Thank you. David, I have a question for you.
Something about this free speech.
Yes, please. Please.
Okay. There is a difference between protected and free speech and the obligation of the administration to distance itself from certain speeches. And that has not been done. It has been done vaguely, but not decisively. I'll give you an example. When Milos Yiannopoulos was his name, he was an anti-Latino, and he was invited here to UCLA by the Republican Jewish student, not Jewish, student organization. Chancellor Black told him, I cannot stop you from speaking because you were invited by a legitimate student group. But I can tell you that your values are not our values. And then he continued and he listed all the contributions of the Latinos community to our city, to our country, and to the world. Trumpeted, okay? He didn't do that when anti-Semites came here and spoke, anti-Zionists came here. Okay? He could have done it. Some other university professor did it. Namely, just to say, your values are not our value, and it's my responsibility as a chancellor to distance myself from what I heard today.
Today, thank you. So, there's a question for Nir. We have a comment, actually. It says, just to add another perspective, this is to your experience, Judea, but I want you to answer, if you could, Nir, that anti-Zionism is not felt in the sciences. This person says, I'm a PhD student in the sciences, and it very much exists and is growing among the student body. First, you, Nir, and then you, Judea. I'd like to know, how do you have conversations with your colleagues, your students, about have you tried to have any conversations? What has been your experience in sort of like one-on-one interactions with people in your departments, colleagues, about this? Has that happened?
I would say the exact opposite has happened. We've tried to keep the hospital a conflict-free zone where we do medicine and we don't discuss politics or conflict of any kind. It's very hard to do, but that's the medical mission, first and foremost, to treat patients. When somebody comes in and they have cancer, honestly, they don't care what religion their doctor is. They don't care where they fall on a political conflict. They want the best, most qualified doctor to take care of them and to be focused on taking care of them and not on other issues. So we, in general, have not. And the one last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to DEI and how to convince people that it's not a good thing, I think the best thing to do is to start at the end. You have to show that the end product of this process is rotten. If you can show, for instance, our medical students are failing at the highest rates that they've ever failed at, and the school its rankings is dropping like a stone, and I always tell people, would you go see the Lakers if they had a DEI program and they were like all white? I wouldn't want to, even though it would be a lot more balanced. You want to go and have the best doing whatever it is that they excel at. And so if you can prove that the output is not good, that is the place to start this discussion.
Judea, I'm wondering, just along those lines, and to answer this question that came in from a PhD student in the sciences, have you attempted any conversations with other people in your department about anti-Zionism or Zionism or Israel or what's happening October 7th, or do you post October 7th, or do you kind of steer clear of this and try to keep politics out of off campus?
So I haven't been attacked the way that I hear near had, okay? I've been shielded in the sciences where people are not talking politics. And when we start talking politics, they do not attack me because they see that I rejoice being attacked. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Talk to me about apartheid. Talk to me about Israel. Ask me about settler colonialism. This is my favorite.
Yeah.
And because... But I've been doing a lot of talking with Muslims. I had a whole series of, we call it Jewish Muslims dialogue. Okay? And I talk with the Muslim scholars, and I know exactly how to handle that attack. So, and I know exactly the point at which we reach a wall of miscommunication.
What is that?
The wall is Israel's right to exist. And that is why I keep on saying, let's talk about anti-Zionism. Because this is the turf where we can win the argument hands down.
So yeah, explain for everyone here, for their next cocktail party, how do you win that argument hands down?
Well, attack me, please.
Look, I mean...
No, the main thing is...
No, please. I mean this seriously. What is, in your view, the best argument for the existence of the Jewish state?
Yeah, this is a good question. The best argument is that we are equally indigenous. This is our slogan. This is my slogan. And this is something that I, as a Zionist, can say, and you, as an anti-Zionist, cannot say. And I've tried to have them say it even if they don't mean it. At some point we had a meeting and there was an Egyptian doctor there, and I said, and he said, yes, we also believe in two-state solution. Really? Stand up. Let me ask you a question. Okay. Can you say the word equally indigenous and do not mean it? Just move your lips and say it. Okay? And he couldn't say that. He could not. This is the difference. That is my...
I want to address something that you said, Judea, earlier, and I think, David, you may, or Vivian, you may have used this term, narrative, which I hear a lot about as a journalist. People talk all about how they have a certain narrative and someone else has another narrative, and that word always kind of rubs me the wrong way, because implicit in the term, or implicit in the use of the term narrative, is that there is no such thing as objective reality. There are just different points of view, different perspectives. And it seems to me now, if I'm going to offer my own suggestion about how to combat anti-Semitism, that professors on campus need to start teaching again about the fact that there is an objective reality. There is a truth, there is a fiction. But I wonder, your professors, and Judea, I'd like to start with you, since I think you have the most philosophical bent. How do you start introducing back into the curriculum, into the minds of young people, the idea that there are facts? And if you could keep this at 30 seconds or less, that'd be great.
No, this is indeed a very important topic in the philosophy of science.
Right.
The illusion that there are facts has given humanities tremendous amount of progress. Okay? It is an illusion, I agree. But it is a very useful kind of illusion, and the method by which we drive ourselves to seek that illusionary fact has proven itself very successful in the advancement of science. I can elaborate more on that, but by the way, the Daniel Pearl memorial lecture that will be given on May 30th by Pinker, okay, will deal just with this idea of rationality. What is rationality? Why sometimes we abandon it? Why it's so hard to defend it? And so on. And whether we should continue striving for it.
Thank you. With that, I have one more question that's actually going to be directed at Kira, who is the founder of JFrg, and who I'm going to introduce in just a moment to come up, and I'm going to let her address it, which is there's a faculty member out here who's asking, how do we establish satellite organizations like Jewish Faculty Resilience Group on their campus? So I'm going to let Kira address that in just a moment. First of all, I want to thank everyone here very, very much for taking part. I think we've solved everything tonight, so I feel like this was very, very productive. Without further ado, I'd like to turn to Kira Stein, who is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA School of Medicine, and who is the founder and head of JFrog, and who can answer how you might establish other future organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much. Your presence shows how important this mission is and how urgently we need to act. Given the marginalization and isolation that Jewish faculty and students are experiencing at UCLA, JFrog faculty are deeply grateful to the Simon Wiesenthal Center for their tremendous generosity in hosting this critical event. I want to especially thank Mark Katrick and the entire team of the Museum of Tolerance. I also want to take a moment to share our appreciation for UCLA Chabad and Hillel, the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, and the Academic Engagement Network, who have co-sponsored this event. And thank you, Peter Savodnik, the Free Press, and my esteemed colleagues on the panel for volunteering your time and expertise to shine a light on this emergency for the Jewish people and the free world. In the wake of the October 7th massacres and the rising tide of anti-Semitism on campus, the Jewish Faculty Resilience Group established itself as a grassroots organization of dedicated faculty determined to fight anti-Semitism. Today, JFrog comprises almost 200 committed Jewish and non-Jewish pro-Israel faculty, postdoctoral researchers, and staff supported by countless community volunteers. The ADL reports that there's been a 2,000% increase in anti-Semitic incidences on UC campuses. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Please please take a look at the second and third pages of the program. I gave you, and you can take more. If we probably have more outside, take more and share them with people. These pages list only a few of the many, many egregious examples of anti-Semitism at UCLA. So take a moment to imagine. How would you feel if you were walking to school or around your apartment or residence halls and overheard people yelling, "Gas the Jews," or "Dirty Jew"? Or if you ran into swastikas on the way to class, or if you have to show a wristband, or a stamp on your arm. Think about that, a stamp on your arm to be allowed free access to public property. How about being shoved or hit to make sure you, as a Jew, stay out of an ever-expanding area on campus? How about being kicked in the head until you are unconscious as you go to pick up your little sister's Israeli flag from the ground? Well, this is the reality we are facing today on the UCLA campus and beyond. UCLA students, faculty, and staff have been threatened, harassed, segregated, and physically assaulted. Lectures are infused with anti-Semitism and anti-Israel indoctrination. Faculty have been retaliated against because of their identification as Jews, their association with Israel, or their attempt to just simply shed light on anti-Semitism. Please take the pamphlet home. Take extra. Read it. Share it. So, how did this happen? How did this happen? Well, for the past 20 years, the Jewish community has been complacent. While our adversaries have been meticulously planning and organizing, all this time we've been complacent. On campuses across the country, we're facing well-coordinated, well-funded groups that are pro-Hamas, neo-Marxist, and anarchistic. These well-funded groups operate with precision and agility. It is imperative that we catch up. The time is now. Did you know that terrorist organizations prepared the campus protest groups for October 7th? On October 7th, UC Berkeley Bears for Palestine issued a statement that supported repeated violence against Jews. The statement was signed by 25 organizations, including National Students for Justice in Palestine, National Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, and SJP chapters on 7 other UC campuses, including UCLA. This was not an accident. They were prepared. Meanwhile, the Jewish community is moving too slowly. We need to wake up and mobilize. We need a grassroots rapid response team and command center on every single campus. So here's the plan. And preparedness is key. To effectively combat anti-Semitism, we urgently need a rapid response team of dedicated experts, legal advisors, PR specialists, and crisis managers ready to act 24/7. We We must establish a crisis communication protocol to swiftly report incidents, assess situations, and engage university officials, media, and law enforcement. Our Jewish Faculty Resilience Group, JFrg, is already on this path. Our Air on Campus program meticulously gathers and catalogs detailed reports of anti-Semitism, indoctrination, and civil rights violations. We've delivered hundreds of these reports to the UC Congressional Committee, the US, not UC, the US Congressional Committee on Education in Washington, D.C. Congressional investigators have described our efforts as invaluable. We have partnered with David Levy. David Levy, can you stand up, please? Of Malibu Studios, who's given up most of his commercial work to volunteer nonstop to video student and faculty interviews for Congress. Thank you, David. We also focus on building alliances with Jewish students. UC leaders, Hillel, Chabad, ADL, Stand With Us, Academic Engagement Network, Project Shema, and other organizations. We've developed the UCLA Jewish Faculty Student Alliance to provide critical, emotional, and psychological support to students, faculty, and staff, fostering a resilient and united Jewish community on campus. Now, we need your support. We need your support to sustain and extend our reach. We need, get this, we need to raise $1 million immediately. I know that sounds like a lot, but believe me, the terrorist organizations and foreign governments behind their efforts are sinking in much, much more than that. Like David Levy, I have made significant personal sacrifices, including curtailing my practice for months and dedicating every free moment to this cause. My JFrg faculty colleagues, please stand up, all of you. Please, it's important. People need to see us. And there's more. Don't be shy. Please, all JFrg. They're all making sacrifices, staying up late and working tirelessly to address one incident after another, every day at UCLA, sacrificing time with our families. You can ask my children. Thank you for putting up with that. We cannot sustain our efforts anymore without funding. We can't. We need your support. Your support will allow us to start building the professional team we need over the summer to be ready for our adversaries, such as the Qatari-funded Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine, who are already planning for the fall. UCLA is a microcosm of the broader challenges we face. Campus Jews are the canaries in the coal mine for off-campus Jews. I ask that you give generously. Please scan this QR code with your phone's camera, please. Complete your donation and be sure to mention JFrg faculty, JFrg faculty, so that your support is properly allocated. The UCLA, we know and love, has been deeply damaged. The campus community is fractured, and indoctrination has replaced education. We must not be passive in the face of this anti-Semitism. We must be dignified, but vocal, organized, and prepared to combat this heinous activity. Thank you all for your support, and please give generously to help us continue and expand our fight against Jew hatred on campus. We've been feeling very alone, faculty, the students too. Imagine being a student at UCLA, leaving your family behind. We have to stick together, and it means the world that all of you are here. We hope to develop this rapid response team and command center at UCLA, and eventually expand it to other campuses. And just to answer the question, already we have a WhatsApp chat, and we've already had our first meeting of a coalition of different leaders from different campuses. So if you are a member of a different campus, another campus from UCLA, you can join that coalition. And we're already, trying to coordinate our activities with other California campuses. So you're not alone, and we'll help you. We'll help you start your chapter. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Am Yisrael Chai.